and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Today, Thursday, the 10th of December is International Human Rights Day. And as we look back on the year, 2020 has proven to be a challenging year for human rights in particular. The COVID-19 health crisis has curtailed a wide range of basic human rights, but it's also our management of the pandemic that was used to justify many violations, especially for the already marginalized. Now, joining us on the show tonight to remind us why we need to stand up for human rights, we have Jerald Joseph. He's one of the commissioners of the National Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, or better known as SUHAKAM. He's also the chair of the Complaints and Monitoring Working Group. Jerald, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
Happy Human Rights Day to you.
Happy Human Rights Day to you.
Let's start with news that recently the Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Datuk Hassan, he, in charge of legal affairs, of course, he said that SUHAKAM's annual report this year will not be debated in Dewan Rakyat. Now, I'm just wondering, did this make sense to you? Were you expecting this, given that this year there was already limited sittings for Dewan Rakyat and there was time constraints anyway?
Well, usually we should be celebrating and talking some powerful good news for Malaysian human rights, but that's not the case. So this has been one of the issues about our annual report. Last year was a precedent. First time ever in 20 years. Finally, we have a debate agenda, and as I think I remember having a discussion with both of you. It was a great discussion, civil, substantive, and we lost that opportunity. So we were thinking that this would be, again, a non-partisan issue. Human rights is for all. So the Minister of Law should have put it in and got us through. And he used the words, memandangkan urusan-urusan kerajaan perlu didahulukan. That means government business should take priority. And I asked, isn't human rights government business? Because human rights is, the duty bearer of human rights is the government of the day. So we look to the government to help us get forward on this, and this could have given them a good opportunity to answer the many questions of people's concern in our report. And not putting it on the agenda, I think, is inexcusable, because I think the Speaker, despite the limited time, still managed the agenda, shortened time. That's understandable, but not putting it on the agenda, I think, is a regression, because we've had the first move after 20 years, and we had expected that to be a norm.
But Jerald, what exactly happens? If you can explain to people, because they might think, oh, you know, well, Parliament's a bit of a talk shop. This would have been just, you know, exchanges, and then that'll be over. What are the consequences of parliamentarians and also those from the executive when they discuss these issues? What real life consequences are there?
So, Parliament is a talk shop. But a mandated talk shop, you know, and we need that because government needs to be checked by the legislative. So the items in our annual report gives them a way to bring up their people's local issue, because it could be from refugee, from housing, from environment, from the difficulty of statelessness. All is in our report. So a member of parliament from that area will pick it up and say, I want to discuss and why I propose this. So it gives them a way to talk to the government. And I remember last year, many of the proposals went back to the government. PH at that time said that Datuk Vikeliu is no more with us, but he was answering the question. And so they directed many of it. So this to the government, which means it gave and opened up almost an open chapter of non-agenda items of the local MPs to be brought up. And that's what our annual report captures.
Well, so it's not going to be debated in Dewan Rakyat, but maybe we can talk about it on this show, perhaps. Okay, so tell us, what was in the annual report from SUHAKAM? So this was looking back at 2019, right?
Yeah.
So what was in the report that we should be talking about?
So we should have completed this exercise in the early part of 2020, but given the mess of the pandemic, it's at the end of the year. So we spoke about the good things that happened, the challenges, and the work we did, because it's our accountability process as the Commission to the people of Malaysia. And by law, we are supposed to give our annual report, and we take it seriously. We want people to tell us, hey, you're not going in the right direction, or you're not doing this, and you should do this, and that's this is the moment, and we are really open to it. Example, when I look back at 2019 in preparing for this, our annual report, it sort of gives a bit of a wow. It was a hopeful year and we thought it would continue. Examples, 9 law reform committees were happening and we were part of it, you know. SUHAKAM was either giving comments, giving a draft law, or being invited. You know, it ranges from Sedition Act to whistleblower to ombudsman. So a variety of activities that we would say. So people who may not have picked up can they say, there were 9 reform laws there. We also did watching briefs of important human rights, what we call human rights issue cases in the court. So we'd send a lawyer on our behalf. We would report about the 1,154 complaints we received. There's a large number of complaints, but we get a big portion of it from Sabah. And that's also because of the issue of statelessness and documentation. That's sort of their last post to go and officially be recognized with a complaint. And then Sarawak had 70. So we won't tell the kind of issues that come up. We captured the process of the Universal Periodic Review that the Foreign Minister mentioned today in his speech, and that's a UN international process. And we also put on record the visits of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights. There were 4 Special Rapporteurs visiting Malaysia, and that's like, wow. I mean, the country almost seemed like it was a wonderful space. Not that we got the things we wanted at that point, but I mean, I was hoping that would be this year's escalation, not regression.
And very briefly, would you say 2020, I know you don't have a report on that yet, but 2020, does it constitute a regression? Would you say that categorically?
Yes, I think I would say that because when you had so much of steps taken, so any non-step for me is a regression. Any silence of not answering to this question would be regression. You know, for me, human rights, I mean, we know the political uncertainty, you know, but that will be happening for a long time. And I'm really hoping and praying it will be worked out by the Malaysian people and choosing the government. But whoever is in the driving seat, you are mandated by law to be the duty bearers of human rights. So I would expect you, whoever the Prime Minister, now it's Prime Minister Muhyiddin and his entourage, to take us forward. Not to be silent, not to even say no to some of the reforms proposed before, you know. I think ministers have said no to National Harmony Commission, which I'm very sad because this is like a tough issue in the country, racism and all that. So a National Harmony Commission would have been a great thing coming, but it's a no to that. IPCMC, which was so close to getting something new, and I think that would have been good for the police themselves. You know, it's not about anti-police; it's about pro-police. Is how I see it. Right. So there were a few things already they said no to, and that's for me a regression.
Well, Jerald, we're going to have you stay here in the studio with us. We're going to come back and continue this conversation more with Jerald in a little later in the show. But when we come back after this quick break, we'll speak to the SUHAKAM Commissioner for Child Rights. So stay tuned to consider this.
At Love Beauty and Planet, we can make a difference one shower at a time. Virgin coconut oil gives damaged hair and skin a fresh start. We make bottles from 100% recycled plastic. Small acts of love can make a beautiful difference.
Walaupun bermain di dalam rumah, terdapat kotoran dan bakteria di baju yang mungkin tidak kelihatan. Breeze menanggalkan kotoran degil dan menghapuskan 99.9% bakteria. Breeze menanggalkan kotoran, menghapuskan bakteria.
Hi, thanks so much for staying with us on Consider This. Joining us now, we have Professor Datuk Noor Aziah Awal. She's a SUHAKAM Commissioner that looks at children's rights. Now, good evening, Datuk Aziah. Now, I want to ask you, to begin with a broad question, what are the main challenges that you've observed when it comes to, advocating or fighting for child rights here in Malaysia?
Thank you very much. Good evening. Basically, because I'm not saying that children's rights are entirely new to Malaysian, but of course, when we signed the Convention on Rights of Children, and then we ratified it, and then we passed the Child Act, it looks like it's a new thing, and people were talking about rights of children in terms of protecting, giving them protection. For a very long time, we already have laws protecting children, but at the same time, we are also encouraging or trying to make the general public aware that children have rights, human rights, just the same as any adults, and this right must be respected. And among the things that to get it to the general public is that children must not be discriminated, despite the fact where they are born, whether they are Malaysian, non-Malaysian, documented, undocumented, whether they're refugees. They are children and they have the basic rights. Right. That's one. Secondly, the most important thing is that children have a right to life, to survival and development, and they must be given to be able to develop to their fullest potentials. And the third one is that when we're doing things for children, whether policy or law, it must be for we must give a priority to the best interests of children. And the final one is rights of children to participate, meaning listening to their views and trying to get them involved in the discussion of their rights and how we could be best. They are the best people to judge their own human rights. And these are among the few things that I think we are getting there, but it's a gradual process. In particular, giving rights to get children involved in making this decision-making process, in particular issues relating to children. So those are the things.
I want to ask you about the last point you made, because it's very interesting. We live in a very patriarchal society, where adults assume that they know best for others, other adults, never mind children. So, how do you go about convincing adults that children have to be in the room when we discuss children's rights?
It's not easy. It's not easy, I can tell you that. And of course, with a society where children are only seen but not heard, that's the most difficult part. And of course, we are all, culturally, we are being brought up in a way that children must not talk when they are adults and things like that. Now, to change that, it started off when I was the representative to ASEAN Commission on Protection and Promotion on Rights of Women and Children, and I was the representative for children for Malaysia. And when there are issues that was discussed in ASEAN, when we brought it back and it has to be passed and as either a conventions or whatever declarations, what we need to do is to have a discussion and have an agreement on what are those policies that we wanted to pass in ASEAN level. And I was asked to actually have a consultation with children. That was the beginning. And of course, when we amended the Child Act 2001, in 2016, we set up the government set up the Children Consultative Council, and that I think the Children Council, National Children Council, and there is two children that represents the children at large, and the meeting is being chaired by the Minister of
That's encouraging to know. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I wanted to know what the update is on Malaysia's commitment to that, because as I understand it, we signed on 1995, but then we're also required to submit a report every 5 years. So far, only one report, right? 2006. Yes. Last year, I believe the government said that a new report would be submitted this year, but then we had a change of government. So what's the update? I mean, are we still committed to this convention?
well, we signed, we ratified, and we made a promise, and we have sent the first report. And yes, Malaysia is one of the countries that are still lagging behind in sending our reports. And even when I was at ACWC, I have actually mentioned this, because when we had meetings with the Child's Right Committee, they were saying that, well, for those countries that still owing this, the Committee on Report should send the reports. And somehow or other, I mean, the Deputy Minister of Women, the previous one, Wabihana, actually promised that the report should be sent, well, will be sent in 2020. However, there was a change of government, and when I met the current minister in June this year, that was the first few things that I mentioned, that Malaysia still should send the report this year, because I believe when we had that discussion end of last year, that the report is almost ready. And the word almost is like, it's every year is almost ready, but still not sent. I'm sorry, but
what is the stumbling block? What is funny, but what is the stumbling block?
I'm disappointed because it's not been sent yet. Yeah.
So what is the stumbling block? Why the hesitance to send the report?
I don't know. I mean, if you ask the ministry, at first, I think in 2019, there were issues like the report is still with the AD chambers, the report is then back with the ministry, they have to do a few amendments, then probably send back. And to be honest with you, I don't even know where the report is, and that's probably the reason why it's not being sent.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you about some of the issues that perhaps, were carried over from the Pakatan Harapan administration, attempts to address issues like child marriage, for instance. Where have those attempts gone now in the new government?
As far as child marriage is concerned, the ministry actually launched the strategic plan before in the previous government launched the strategic plan for child marriage, the 5-year plan, and that plan is being monitored and implemented, and they have already set up a technical committee and also steering committee to look into the issue of the implementation of the strategic planning on child marriage. And I am one of the members of the steering committee in that respect. So I think as far as child marriage is concerned, and in fact, there's a few things that in the pipeline. It's already being implemented. Either pilot, issue on diversions is on, and we are also looking at family-based childcare, whereby children are not. I mean, this is the hope of the ministry to deinstitutionalize children. They don't have to be kept in institution, but they are then being looked after by families, either foster or care family that can look after them. And this has gradually moved forward. I mean, the excuse is the COVID-19 has sort of delayed the process, but it is on, and I am in all the 3 steering committees and looking into the progress of those projects.
We hope to speak to you again to get an update on all these committees in the future. Thank you so much, though, for speaking with us tonight, Aziah. Happy Human Rights Day to you. Thank you. And we're going to take a quick break here on Consider This, but we will be back with more, so stay tuned.
Merah jambu, lambang manis? Tidak, ini saatnya untuk ubah imej merah jambu. Merah jambu itu ketabahan, keberanian. Merah jambu itu melambangkan kemungkinan. Sunsilk.
Anda mungkin menghasilkan salah satu daripada komponen harta intelek ini. Namun, jangan biarkan ia diciplak. Daftar di MyPo sebelum terlambat.
Hi, Thanks so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's come back to our conversation with Jerald Joseph. He's one of the commissioners of SUHAKAM as we look back at a very challenging 2020 and also assess our gaps, the gaps in our commitment to the human rights agenda. Jerald, okay, so as I understand it, Malaysia is bidding for a spot on the UN Human Rights Council. We've been on this council before, twice before, if I understand correctly. Now, maybe you can begin by telling us why is it that we want to be on the Human Rights Council and what are our chances of getting on?
I think every country aspires to be on this council. It's, I think 47 members get on the council of the whole UN membership. So you get on for 1, 2 or 3 years, maximum 3 years. And it's a good name for the country. I mean, you
don't have to have an unblemished record on human rights to be on it, right? Understand the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is there, the United States is there.
So you have a mix of all kinds of personality. I don't think your membership will give you a pass to show that you are good or not good.
Okay.
But your membership then would demand that you stand up to some principles of human rights, because in the candidature, and I'm sure Malaysian government will be putting up its pledges soon. Usually the style is announcement and then there'll be a pledge submitted in order to convince other governments to vote for them, because it's all voting by government. This is a government voting process. So Malaysia has a very good standing in the United Nations. When you go to Geneva or New York, Malaysia has got good standing. It gets good support. I think it's been on the council twice and narrowly missed once, I think two years ago. But any government would want to be on it because it's prestige and it's good diplomacy. But for us, Malaysians, it must mean stricter responsibility to carry the human rights agenda.
So this is interesting because it's a process by which the government ups the ante on itself, right? It says, okay, I have these ambitions, now I have to, as it were, live up to them. But in your experience, Jerald, what has been the leverage gained by domestic institutions like SUHAKAM and human rights defenders in the NGO world when government does this, when it does in fact put itself in that spot?
I think going back in history, in the more difficult times and darker days of human rights in Malaysia, that was our small opening, because we could go to the commission then, or now it's called council, and say that as a member of the Human Rights Council that is supposed to comply with human rights standard, blah, 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 and in Malaysia this is happening, So Malaysian government will take that time to answer, because it's safe facing. Okay. So for us it's a good opening, but I think more substantively, I think Malaysia as a whole, government and society, must take this responsibility seriously and show other governments we can do far better than the little we are doing now.
So this is for a future term, right? It's not for the immediate coming
2022 to 2024
Understood.
term. Yeah,
okay, all right. I want to talk to you a little bit about this year. Particularly, it has been a very challenging year, particularly when it comes to human rights. And if anything, this year we saw the intensification of xenophobia on several levels. We had even politicians and the media openly playing up xenophobic sentiments. For you, Jerald, this year in particular, as we battled the pandemic, was xenophobia one of the key human rights issues for you?
Yeah, I think sadly, while virus attacked us in our bodies, or at least the fear in the society, something else was happening in the minds of Malaysians, shockingly, because I thought we had the xenophobic tendency, but it was never this pronounced or loud, and it only came out because of fear. But my problem is society commonly can be swayed by WhatsApp, by propaganda. It happens everywhere. But where is the leadership standing up and saying, no, this is not what you're supposed to do. Okay, we are angry. Okay, job loss. Okay, this, but put it right. And that's what I expect. Leadership, both in, especially in government, but also members of parliament. We need people to stand up, but very few stood up, because it was not popular. And that's why I think it was very sad that xenophobia became the issue. But again, xenophobia was pronounced only because at the background of Malaysia, the issue of racism sort of runs through our fabric of society, sadly, And so I think we need to address that in order that people don't think that you can get away with xenophobia by saying, kicking out the foreigners or saying something in refugees or the Rohingyas or the migrants, no matter if they have documents or don't have documents, COVID, the virus does not choose, it just attacks whoever, but the anger was directed, and that's strange.
Jerald, the question, of course, for us who want to see some progress on the human rights front is, the problem of changing governments. And we're looking at perhaps a future where we will see many changes in governments, and governments don't seem to be very stable at this point in time. Is the human rights agenda going to be held hostage by the vagaries of politics, by the changing fluidity of politics? Is there any way of institutionalizing human rights in a way that insulates it from political dynamics?
I think a politician now would ask the question, what are common denominators that will insulate me away from the politics of power politics? Issues like human rights cuts across both ways. You can be a hero, or of course you can not be an anti-hero. So if you use this as your premium and go beyond politics, then you can stand up. So I'm thinking institutionalizing human rights is the courage, the ability to speak about the issue, not as a party member.
Jerald, I have to ask you though, I mean, this is broadly speaking, I'm generalizing here, but do our politicians even understand human rights? What constitutes human? I mean, you talk about them, standing up, that this is an issue that cuts across all, that they can be a hero, but they won't even stand up for xenophobia. Maybe they don't understand that that is a human rights violation.
They understand, but they took a choice not to stand up because it's not popular. See, the calculation of politics is to win some kind of support. So if this issue is going to give me more brickbats, I will turn around and pick something else. But your silence is actually a message of you not standing up. So I'm thinking that, for example, the new Menteri Besar of Perak, congratulations to him, but he will have to make sure he stands up for the deforestation of the Orang Aslis, because all kinds of things the former MB did, he needs to be able to have an agenda that is inclusive, he needs to... So MBs now have a role to think beyond, because the numbers are so small, within a little bit you can be kicked out. So use human rights as a way for a common factor. But you're right, Melisa, many of them don't dare move into it because this has been a very negative black mark. Human rights means you are you're a bad one. But I just heard this morning on BFM, the UMNO Youth Info Chief.
Right.
He keeps speaking about human rights, and if that is the new UMNO, I'll be impressed. But that is not the full of every party, and I think that's where we need to push the agenda of human
Jerald,
rights.
Thank you so much for joining us on this show tonight. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Good night.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off the evening.
Thanks so much for watching. Good night, folks.
Thanks, Jerald.